I am the research director for the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. I started as a volunteer here in 1994 when we were the Bicycle Coalition of Delaware Valley, and we had one employee, and really the board was sort of like the staff, right? But in 2001, there was they put in a grant to create a regional bike map, and I was hired to do that project in 2001. I also worked on a safe routes to school thing early on for Philly, and became a full-time employee in 2004. So I've been associated with the Bicycle Coalition for 31 years, literally half my life, exactly, if you want to just add up my age. And still learning about technology, and I am very happy to be here and talk about this.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. I'll share a little bit about myself, and then it connects to you as well because you were one of our first power users for 3D Street. So I'm the founder of 3D Street, and I really believe in the goal of making public space design accessible to everyone. It's a hard thing, but I think we can do it. I live here in San Francisco with my family, and then I do a lot of work with our local Sierra Club on green infrastructure. So how can we use natural elements to accomplish a lot of the same traffic calming goals that we'll be talking about today around safe streets? So I'm going to skip forward a couple slides to talk a bit more about what is 3D Street, and then how does this all connected to the work that John and other folks do. And then we're going to do a really deep dive into some scenes that John has been working on as part of his role with the Greater Philadelphia Bicycle Coalition. So if you don't know, 3D Street is open source urban visualization software. I am the primary contributor, and then we have lots of other contributors that do both pro bono and paid work. We have a global user base. It's used by tens of thousands of folks, whether they're professionals, advocates, or students worldwide. A little bit of history. One of the first big projects that actually got some notoriety with 3D Street as an open source platform was thanks to John's work. Do you want to tell a little bit about what this project was and how this came about?
Sure. So this is a rendering of, and also it kind of shows you like how much this app has advanced by looking at this image.
This is like old
Um,
school.
Old school, way back in 2021. So in Philadelphia, like many other cities, in 2020, there was a movement to create more open streets, basically because the roads were already open. Um, and the main one here in Philadelphia is in Fairmount Park on the west side of the Schuylkill River, and that's how it's pronounced. If you look it up and you're like, how do you pronounce Schuylkill? It's a Dutch word meaning hidden river. Um, but there is MLK Drive is the West Shore Road, and it is owned by the city. The On the east side there is Kelly Drive, which is where they have the rowing competitions. That is a state road, so the city really didn't have any jurisdiction on shutting that road down. But MLK Drive was really perfect because it's really a commuter route, a shortcut, without traffic congestion at all. There was very little traffic on that street anyway. 4 Mile Road, and it's 4 lanes, and almost impossible to cross when the traffic is flowing. There is a side path. If you look at that image, you can see that gray asphalt on the right side of that image is what's there. It's a side path, um, and we proposed, since it was an open street for well over a year, 24 hours, 7 days a week, huge success. But the reality is that once COVID faded, people just went back to car brain and went back to normal, right? So this created, we wanted to preserve this somehow, knowing that this road was being reopened to cars. And we proposed a two-way cycle track next to the side path, side path with pedestrians and slower vehicles, and the two-way bikeway, concrete protected for cyclists. That did not happen, but there was a great article in the Inquirer about Philadelphia Inquirer about this, and it was probably one of the first times that 3D Street um, was basically highlighted in a news article.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah, it
want
was
to
really cool.
yeah. I guess the other thing is that later on, our Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, have actually used it in a couple of reports. They've found it convenient as well to use to make um, quick drawings of cross sections.
Yeah, thank you for being one of those early, um, I don't know, tip the spear folks trying to use this. And this was one of the first times I saw something where, gosh, this really helps people understand that this real estate is available to be used by more than just cars. Um, Another really fun example here in San Francisco was a gentleman, John Oram. He goes by the name Burrito Justice. And we had a pretty infamous center running bike lane here in San Francisco. And he was proposing an alternative where we keep the center running bike lane, but we convert one side of the road to people. So pedestrianize half of the street and still allow for business access, loading passengers, goods, etc., on that other half. And similar to what you experienced with the Philadelphia Inquirer, these sorts of visuals really do help when a reporter is trying to convey the concepts from an advocate to the general public. And so we do find that this can be really helpful as an advocate when you're trying to get the word out. Um, so after we did some of those projects, we did get a fair amount of notoriety, and I left my full-time job in tech and started a company around this called 3D Street. And we got a couple of really cool projects like the World Bank Group doing designs in Pacific islands as well as Africa. And then listening to customer feedback, we added some really key features that they've been asking for. So one of them was the ability to see the real world and kind of mix that imagery of what you're creating with real world maps and actually 3D models of the buildings and elements that are in the natural landscape. We also expanded to placemaking use cases. Here's an example of a bus plaza in Los Angeles. And then we worked with partners and customers to add more 3D models that allow for more than just traffic safety, but also how do we have vibrancy and activate public spaces. And then we also added AI rendering, which is really just a fancy word for using some of the latest AI models and being able to render those scenes into small animations. And so based on this customer feedback, we keep iterating this product, and we're at the point now where we kind of have this collection of tools. Here's kind of the four primary pieces. We have, where we started was that procedural street geometry that we saw in that Philadelphia Inquirer article. We then added 3D tile base maps. We've created a large library of 3D models to make it easy to drag and drop things to convey your vision. And then we mix that all together with AI rendering, and we'll see some more examples of how that helps add realism and a more photographic look to some of this work. So that's all about the tech, where we've come from, and I'm excited to switch gears and focus on our guest, John. And I'm going to kick this off by asking why. So, why do we use this sort of stuff, and what role have visualizations played for you in your Safe Streets advocacy?
So I first discovered 3D Street in 2021. What I was looking for was a free alternative to Remix. Some planners out there might know Remix as it is basically a program where you can like plug in a cross section for a road diet or the existing conditions, and it just overlays it on a satellite imagery
It's
or
kind of like
on
drawing on a 2D map.
exactly. But it does it really quick. I mean, consultants would take days to kind of do what Remix does. The problem with Remix is that it's a commercial product, and our little nonprofit with 11 employees, 11 to 15 employees, depending on what time of the year it is, um, it's just nowhere in our budget. And in fact, transit agencies also use Remix. And from what we've seen, $5,000 a year is what our MPO pays just for um, doing the visualizations. But of course, Remix does a lot more, and our transit agency, SEPTA, I believe they pay nearly $100,000 a year for um, all the other elements, which is a lot of synchronization of transit and
Yeah. Yeah,
issues
their
like
main
that. So
product, I
it's
think, is around that transit planning use case.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's almost like the bike ped planning is kind of secondary
Yeah.
for Remix. It's kind of a
Yeah.
side gig,
Yeah.
really. Um, yeah, so really, I found 3D Street really because I we were just happy as heck that we had Remix. I mean, not Remix, Street Mix, which some of you are familiar with, streetmix.net, which was kind of the baseline for 3D Street, right? It was great because that was also a case where we couldn't really visualize. We would say, "Oh yeah, this is what we want this to happen," but we couldn't really show it and prove that you can, fit it in that space.
Yeah, and I'll show a
So
quick example. So you're talking about
yeah,
Street Mix, which is another app. We're friends with the Street Mix crew, and within the Street Mix application now, there's a button where you can take the street that you've designed in that cross-section view, and then open it instantly by clicking on this Open in 3D Street view. And that is where we started, as we started just in kind of this showing the geometric progression of going from 2D to 3D.
yeah, and it really enabled us to like show because we could measure the street on Google Maps, and then we can come up with what the cross section was, or actually do go out there with a rolling
Mm-hmm.
measure tool and see what the actual dimensions were. But 99% of the time, you can just measure it out on satellite, and you get a
Yeah.
pretty rough idea. Like this is all preliminary stuff. It's really the traffic engineers that have to kind of like be precise about where things go. So
So
we're kind of go ahead.
that leads us into the next question of like when to use this. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's okay at this stage to have not perfection, a guess, an estimate when we're putting these things together. Because again, we're kind of in this stage often as advocates of we want to show what's possible, but this is not necessarily engineering ready.
Exactly. And I've found over the years that the most common time that I run to these things is uh, right after unfortunately, after a bicyclist or pedestrian death. And, you know, almost we can, there's lots of victim blaming going on. Um, there's issues with speeding and whatnot. And, um, but really putting something out there to show that you could slow traffic down and make the road safer immediately. I think, for one thing, um, it kind of it kind of puts some meaning to these tragedies that we know how to fix these things, and this is how you fix it here. Um, and so I would say that's the most common. The other time is like we when the city proposes something, road diet or something, and opposition builds on it, or we are not happy with sort of like the treatment. Like I mean, really, I think I've been in this business for, like I said, 30 years, and we've gone from fighting so hard to put sharrows and lines on the road, which we're still doing in many of our suburban areas, to actually like none of that really works. You need physical separation um, to make these things safer, slow the traffic down, and to keep the vulnerable road users safe, making facilities available for all ages and abilities. Um, and a lot of times you just have to show people how that happens.
Yeah, great. So, do we want to transition into some getting started tips, or do you want me to go right into the? You can go right into
I would
the
go.
scene
I
if
would
you want.
start with the getting. Why don't you do the getting started tips, and then I'll go into my first
Great.
rendering.
Okay. So I guess the simplest way that we see customers getting started with 3D Street really is going the street mix route. So coming up with a basic cross section like John is describing, and then once you have that basic cross section, it's very easy to then go directly into 3D Street. So let's say that we have this crazy huge street that we're generating here. Click on share, go into 3D Street. And this is just a very quick rendition of what that scene looked like. And what I'm doing is I'm moving around by clicking to dragging, and then you can also press the shift key to rotate. And it's similar to a 3D modeler app like Blender, or even similar to Google Maps, where you're able to kind of pan around, but also rotate and then select objects as you hover over them. What else should we cover in this part, John?
Um, Maybe focus. Maybe show people how to put something like you have a lot of like elements in this
Mm-hmm.
image here.
Mm-hmm.
You might want to focus on sort of like the light rail station, or show
Yeah.
like some of the other amenities.
Yeah, totally. So, a couple of tips here. So, you can select an object and you can either double click on it or click on focus. And that's a really handy tip to navigate the scene. So, if you kind of get lost and your camera's moved around somewhere where it's hard to figure out where to go, you can just double click and center yourself around those elements. And then, like John's describing, we have all these different objects. If you click add layer, we have everything from traffic control devices. This is a very basic kind of raised crosswalk slash speed bump. Here's other examples of speed humps, traffic posts, bollards, and you just drag and drop them to create whatever sort of arrangement you want. Um, we've been adding more plants, trees. Some of these are really, they start to look a lot nicer as we've added more and more models. So that's a super basic treatment here of slowing vehicles down, providing protection for people at that bus stop. Yeah. This is another thing, John, that you prepared. I really like this. So we have basic models that come out of the box with 3D Street, but then you can also add your own. So you click on custom layers, and you can paste in links to custom GLTF or GLB models. Maybe you can describe a little bit what you did here, John, and what people can use this for.
Sure. So we have a tiny URL link. It's tinyurl.com 3D-street right there. So anybody could use these. So this is kind of my repository of all these 3D models that I'm making. Um, some of them are like that light rail train that is kind of AI generated from photos.
That's great.
Um,
Which service do you use for the AI generation?
um, it's in that group that you showed when you were doing the Lightning McQueen.
Oh, yeah,
Can't remember
yeah.
it.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
couple. I'll show that link later. Yeah.
yeah, I had to touch it up because it's kind of fuzzy, and the character. So I did like paste like Riverline on the side. Um, that SEPTA bus over there is really Kieran's model, but I was able to stick a logo on it and the paints, and I actually have a bike a bus bike rack somewhere on this image that I put in front of that bus. So that's like one of my little experiments. That Yeah, I don't know what he would. Yeah. So yeah, that's your um, was that a new flyer? I forget.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, and I just looked at the SEPTA logo, and I made a primitive, and I just plopped it on the side.
Yeah.
Um, for the record, I hate Blender.
Yeah.
So
Blender's tough.
um, people always say it's
Powerful
easy.
but tough.
I like what my brain does not function with it. Um, I find I have more success um, with SketchUp because SketchUp is more of an architectural program anyway, and a lot of these elements that are in here are adopted from SketchUp. Other stuff is I've just made primitives. Um, the in the selection thing, maybe you can show people how to. Actually, I was going to just throw it in anyway. So the other thing is that there was a repository previously uh, that Kieran recommended. It was Glitch. They went out of business, and I lost a whole bunch of models. So now I'm trying to put them back in. Um, but I do have them on my computer somewhere. So
Yeah, we'll
I
work
had
together
stuff
on
like,
getting those back.
yeah, like Toronto barriers and concrete barricades and things like that. Um, I think the issue is that there's so much street, you know, street design things that there's no way that I could go on forever with all these elements that are in streets, and so that's is why I'm adding these things. So we have a
Thank you.
place that we can put these, and I'm sure at some point Kieran will just integrate it into sort of like the regular
Totally.
things
Totally.
to pick and choose.
Yeah.
But for now, we have this, and you'll be seeing more elements in the future once I start repopulating this. But lots of good stuff. I have bridges, everything.
Yeah, it's great.
Um,
I really appreciate that work. And I think this is a good example, too, where everyone can be involved in the evolution of what we're doing here. So, in addition to yourself, there's been universities that have contributed objects and created original assets. And you're totally right. Then we can add those things to our add layer panel to make them available for all users. So, really appreciate that. Maybe we should switch gears now and go to our first example case study around intersection safety. Maybe we could do a little quick intro and then I'll hand it over to you to share the screen and kind of step people through that scene.
okay.
Awesome. So where are we and what's going on here?
All right. So this is the intersection. This is in Fairmount Park, and we are at the intersection of Belmont Avenue and Avenue of the Republic. And cyclist Harry Fenton, who was a cycling advocate, he was killed here on his regular afternoon bike ride. And if you look at the overhead here, you can see that this intersection is trouble. And honestly, Fairmount Park in Philadelphia has a lot of these roads that have become highways just because they don't have the interference of the street grid. So a lot of people from uh, West Philly and Northwest Philly use these roads to basically speed on through. Where we have it's kind of divided the park into many places. And one of the things that we've been trying to advocate for, along with some of our other advocates, such as Fifth Square and Philly Bike Action, is to rethink the park roads. I mean, we have seen New York City ban cars in Central Park and Prospect Park. Um, we're not saying totally ban some of these roads, but there are plenty of roads that are lightly used, and the roads that exist there need to be traffic calmed. These shouldn't be highways. This is a park for the public. Um, so here is where I tried to reimagine what this intersection could be, and the fact that it's skewed. Um, Belmont Avenue, which is that street that's going straight up and down, is an arterial. It's a state road, and it goes right through the park. It goes through a historic section of the park. This was where the 1850 centennial or 1876 centennial took place. They even called it the Centennial District. Cuts it right in half, and some of the most important most important monuments in the park and gardens are right in this section. Um, so what I did was to try to create a roundabout and show people that this is a great solution to keep the to make this park more accessible. And I think one of the things about 3D Street is that we don't have a roundabout, so I had to make one. Fortunately, we've been talking about primitive shapes, and that's totally how I created that. Should I share the screen at this point and
That'd
just
be
go over
great.
them
Yeah.
all?
I'll stop sharing and maybe you can kind of show people around and how you use those primitive shapes. And while you're getting that set up, I can explain a little bit more about 3D Street and what these words mean. So, 3D Street is based off of language JavaScript and a framework called 3JS. 3JS is like a 3D renderer, and a lot of what you see in 3D Street are a mixture of these very primitive shapes, like boxes, that have textures applied to them and then are assembled in a certain way to make a street layout. So when you're using our automatic tools, it just generates that for you, like the example of going from Street Mix into a 3D Street scene. But then you can use these primitive models to make different things. And so one example here is that John is using circle, like literally the circle primitive, as a geometric primitive, to then create different sorts of shapes that results in a pretty compelling view for a traffic circle replacement for this troublesome intersection.
Yeah. So let me see if I can. So one of the things you notice here is the layers section, and I've made it very clear that this is something that needs to be an improvement. Um,
Yes, we need
because
to have the ability to create groups or organize things.
And it's partially my fault because really I just went crazy with these things, and I have a lot of stuff that's doesn't have any place to live. So yeah, I
It's
know
not your
they're
fault,
working
John.
on it.
You're creating awesome stuff. That's why you're here. So we need to do a better job of supporting you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So yeah, I'll just select the circle here.
Yeah, that'd be
Uh,
helpful to kind
it's
of see
it's
how that
much
shape.
harder
Yeah, now that you
with
have so
all
many
these
things.
things. Okay, so here's an example. Oh, here we go. So the intersection circle is it's just a this is really the default that when you hit the primitive selection,
On the add layer panel on custom layers.
right, and then you just get the primitive,
Yeah,
and this is,
that's the
if you
default.
can see, that's
Hmm.
the default. And what you can do is that you can change what that primitive is. So that's the main thing, that it defaults as a circle, but there's a whole bunch of other shapes here that you can use. And what I use most often are the box, which is quite small, but
Change the
you can just
dimensions.
change, and you can go five. So this is in meters.
Hmm.
Um, just X this, change the width, and then you can see that we have a box here. You can then go to the one I use the most is the cylinder, because this is how I got these elements to um, just set on top of the original
Yeah.
roundabout.
So the cylinder adds
Um,
some depth so that you see a natural
right.
curb elevation like you would in the real world.
So
And it
you see
also
that
helps.
it's. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say it also helps too when you're mixing it in with real world maps, because then sometimes the circle by itself will get covered by the natural terrain, and so using a cylinder is really helpful to make sure there's enough elevation that that always sits above the terrain. And then now you're
Oops.
modifying the rotation. And so like you're
Right.
showing, you can use these transform controls that are like this widget with the arrows, but you can also accomplish the same thing by editing that information in that right-hand properties panel.
And then you can change what it looks like. So the default is the asphalt,
Yeah.
the one I like to use. It's you can actually add your own textures, but I'm not too good at that. But I just really go for this, and it kind of simulates something that's other than asphalt, whether it's concrete or
Hmm.
some other material. And I just use the grass one for this one because it's got a grass texture.
Hmm.
Um, so that's basically how I shape this all together. I think one of the weirdest things that I've done is this is a two-lane roundabout because it's got a four-lane road. Now I want to say that a lot of the advocates are like, we need this to be two lanes, but I really wanted to do like a quick drawing of what you can do in a shorter term, um, to because there's always resistance. And my dream is, yeah, this is a two lane with a single roundabout, but sometimes you're just going to need to display. You're just going to need to put a two lane roundabout in. Um, so this goes back to the ring feature. Let me see if I can find the.
So
So
you're
what
kind
I
of laying two layers there. You have the asphalt layer, and then you're putting a ring
right.
on top. There you
Yeah.
go.
So it's kind of a trick because I trying to remember how I did this, but I think I changed the color and the material,
Hmm.
and this was really trial and error. So with the ring, there's an interesting thing that I kind of found out was that you can change the radius.
Hmm.
So if you wanted it wider, you decrease it. If you want to narrow it, you increase it. So I really made um, the radius as close to a line as I could.
Hmm.
Um, and somehow I made it dashed, and I can't remember how I did that. But
Yeah, the texture you chose was actually this kind of hashed texture, and so it comes out when you're
uh,
using just that little ring part of it as
yeah,
looking like dashes. Yeah.
I'll just undo that, and I think that's where it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then the other things, first another element here is two-way protected bike lane. This is something that I did in Street Mix. I did this cross section. Um, what you can do, like I said, like I talked about earlier, you can go into Google Maps and measure out. But now that we have this ruler function, this is what the street looks like. Um, but let's see if I can. There's a. Let's go to a part of the street that's not being. Okay, so I'll go over here and see if I can.
Oh, you'll need to
Uh,
reselect the ruler.
I think so.
Just popped off. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Delete
what you're
that.
doing now is kind of using the real world maps and then using the ruler tool to figure out what are those dimensions to make it
Right.
easier then to recreate that.
So you can. The meters is good because it really lines up with the lane widths that are shown, but us Americans, 56 feet, and then you can, and I just write it down by hand, and then I just put
Yeah.
these
Get the lane widths.
dimensions in, right,
Hmm.
and then I will go into back into Street Mix and do
Hmm.
the cross section and do what Kieran showed you previously.
Bring that in. So if we zoom out and we kind of summarize what we're seeing here, it's really three or four, it's four different street mix segments or kind of cross sections that you turned into streets. And then you're
Hmm.
using the circle primitives to create that traffic circle. And then you're using additional primitives or even just copying or duplicating some of these lanes to be able to create the sidewalk path, the grass elements. And then I also see that kind of triangle shaped curb piece. Those are models that you have found, or
Yeah,
maybe, yeah.
I actually for that I think I used the ASHTO guide for the development of bicycle facilities,
Hmm.
or maybe it was an NACTO guide, or maybe I might have just did a visual shot of an actual roundabout splitter islands, um, and then I just traced it in Inkscape, saved it as a SVG file,
Yeah,
and then did one of the things that I can do in Blender, which is convert that to a GLB file, um,
awesome.
sized it out, and then I created that um, as an object, and that's in that model that Kieran showed you earlier.
That's great. Well, maybe we can show then the renderings that I was able to make from that.
Okay.
I think we've done a good job of kind of
Do you want me
showing
to
how.
unshare here?
Yeah, why don't we switch real quick and I'll get the next scene as well. And ready. So we took, last night I took the output that John had made that we saw, and then I used our tool to do AI rendering. And essentially what that does is takes the visual input as a guide for then rendering with AI. The advantage of that is that compared to just using a normal text-based AI image generation tool, this gives us very precise control over the exact location and positioning of the street geometry, which is very important for this sort of use case. So then we kind of get the best of both worlds of having that micro level control over where elements are placed and where the camera is placed. But then we also get the AI to fill in some of those areas like that flat surface of the 2D map and extrude it a bit. So you really get that sense of realism mixed with that custom design that you're controlling, including you can even see the dashed lines that are thin of that ring to make that a 2-lane traffic circle in the middle. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting opportunities there. We'll see. It sometimes doesn't work as well as you expect, and we'll see that in the next presentation about how you have to sometimes coach the model through how to render it accurately. So let's transition to case study number 2. Where is this, John? And maybe you can set up the context for us.
Sure. So this is in Burlington City, New Jersey. This is very close to where I live. In fact, this Burlington City High School is a sending district for my township, and I live, I don't know, about 3 miles southwest of that red dot. Um, and in December of 2024, a crossing guard, Bruce Morlack, was it's a pretty like gut wrenching story. If you want to look it up, it's really heartbreaking. And the video, because there's video of it, not of the actual crash, but what he actually did. And the scenario was that he was guarding a really dubious crossing for um, pedestrians. I mean, for school students. And what he did was that there were two kids crossing. He had to stop, paddle up. Um, they kept walking, and the driver, just basically ignored the stop paddle, ran right through. He grabbed them and stopped them. And as he did that, a second vehicle, driven by someone who had a driver's permit, struck and killed him. The kids were not hurt in this situation. What's even more infuriating was that neither driver was charged. They had $200 fines. And, just hearing the story from his daughter, Michelle Robinson, really frustrating process. You know, the county, like the police, not following up and not keeping them informed of what's happening. Really, it shows kind of like the lack of empathy that I think we have for. I mean, I think that our society has for people who are walking on foot, or this person is in the line of duty, and in the state of New Jersey, he was the second crossing guard killed within a 2-week period. So this set off alarm bells across the state. Burlington City was already there was a student who was killed on the adjacent road, U.S. Route 130, in 2016. There was a law passed. They did sort of a road diet on Route 130, but a very incomplete one. But the county road, which is on the other side of the school, was 45 miles per hour. And it is, just a crazy case. And I'd probably be easier to explain it once I sort of put in the drawing. But so that's the backstory behind it. We are working on doing another road safety audit, actually school travel plans, and asking the state to put in improvements, and a lot of the elements of this visualization is actually what was proposed in by the state after the road safety audit. So this picture here shows the intersection, um, and the crash actually happened to on the left side. So um, west is the left side is south, um, and there is a if we maybe if you can go back to uh, the original photo. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, that's just, yeah. You know what? Don't worry about it. Well, when I get to the rendering,
Why don't we
I'll show
switch?
people.
So I'll
Okay,
stop sharing
that'd
and
probably
then.
be way easier. All right,
Yeah.
all right. Let me get that. Okay. Here we go. All right. So let me zoom out a little here a little bit. As you can see, this is a lot. I spent way too much time on this. But here's where the crash happened. This dashed line, it still shows the crosswalk. This is a previous drawing. So the school district and the county closed that road. So Jacksonville Road's a county road, Burlington County. And Route 130 here is a state road. Here's the high school. And this used to be 3 lanes over here. And they brought it down to 2 lanes. But if you look at the original, maybe I'll turn off these layers here. I don't like that. We're still at 4 lanes, as you can see right here. So 2 lanes, and then all of a sudden at the turn you have 4 lanes. About 6 months ago, there was a crossing guard right here, another crossing guard, who was actually hit on the sidewalk. Minor injuries, but again, this is a very small group of people. There's probably a dozen crossing guards that patrol these. There's actually 2 crossing guards that just use this crosswalk, so it's really. Could you imagine like going to work every day and having this hanging over your head? So, getting back to the rendering, yeah, actually the crash is right. The second crash is right there. This was in the road safety audit. One of the things that was so that preserves that. But if we zoom in, what I did was, again, these are quick fixes. And so there'll be the idea is that this is kind of like the first stage, the quick build, and then putting in permanent concrete structures after that, which you may see in the rendering if I'm not mistaken. Just flex posts. And the other thing I was working on was, okay, so this crosswalk is gone. Actually putting a refuge island here. We have rapid flashing beacons, but I think something more would be needed here. But this could be the new crossing as opposed to over here. One of the other things that's interesting is that there's a lot of asphalt here. And I started working on this to create like a neck down. So this is something I'm still going to add to this rendering, because that's a lot of, it's a local street, and it's just huge.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of like stuff that I experimented with, and one of the things I did was put these buildings in. So when you go into like Google 3D, First of all, it's super slow loading.
Yeah, you got to check that geospatial
Well, yeah,
area.
that really slows things down, doesn't it?
There
It's not checking. Here we
we go.
go. Um, this is not too bad because there is not a lot of vegetation, but what I found, especially with the Belmont Avenue, is that when you have a ton of vegetation, it's really distracting. And even
Totally.
here, with the trees melting and things like that, um,
Yeah, it can
it
occlude
just
the primary goal of what you're trying to present.
right. It's very distracting. So
Yeah.
that's why I often use the 3D. I mean, the 2D version. Can use the map,
Hmm.
um, which is really how I modeled some of these buildings. But I also modeled them here just to get the building heights right. And these
Hmm.
are just boxes which I just created, and I just changed them to be a little translucent, um, and to kind of just sort of give people a feel. And I think it also helps the AI
Totally.
recognizes buildings, and you'll see that in the rendering.
Yeah, no, it's
So
helpful for the humans and the machines here to have that relative sense of where those structures are, especially since that's the focus a lot of the population of who's being impacted.
right now, what Kieran was talking about, how sort of like the AI can mess things up. When I originally um, tried it, it didn't recognize that this is a one way. So this is a highway through a city, a very small city. Here is 130 southbound. That's going towards Camden and Philadelphia. 130 northbound is over here, and that's going towards Trenton. Um, it it showed that every time I tried to do it, it would be a two-way. It would look great over here.
Yeah.
It would look great over here and great over here, and this would be a two-way street.
So it would
So what I did,
hallucinate. It would
right,
hallucinate, and part of its training is it's been trained on so many two-way roads, which is standard, and so it sees this and it says, ah, this is probably a two-way road.
right, and the solution I found was just put the arrows in,
Yeah.
and it seemed to have fixed the problem.
Yeah. And then if we kind of take a step back, how are you using this assets and the things that you create? Like, what are the folks you're talking to, or the ways that you leverage this and talking with the community?
Just going to when we meet with elected officials, um, showing these visualizations. We had a similar situation in Delaware County, which is the western suburbs, Delco. People have heard of that. Um, there was another fatal crash where we did I did a little neck down type uh, scenario, and it worked perfectly because people had an exact idea of what they thought would work. People liked it, and the township is behind it. And I think they are going to make some at least quick build improvements and hopefully find the money to do it permanently. I just think it really just shows how you can make things different. If you've been somewhere all your life and you just say, "Oh, this is a bad intersection," um, if you see it a little differently, like, "Oh, that looks logical and clear," you know, why can't we do this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I can present again, and we'll show the rendered version, and then go to some Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing both those stories and all the work you're doing. Thank you for doing this work. Here's an example of just one of the ways that we can render this and then provide a little bit more realistic of a view. And at this point, like I'm gonna use your example of talking to elected officials. What I find here in San Francisco is that this is more than enough to reduce the level of fear. And so very often what I experience with elected officials is something that you're proposing is different, and they're going to assume the worst case scenario. So they're going to assume people will be angry about it, that it's going to look ugly, and then they're going to hear from their constituents about how they don't like this project. And so what I see when I look at something like this is that it's not very different from what's there today. Like, we have the trees in the same location, the buildings in the same location. I know it sounds basic, but these are the sort of things that basically help people feel comfortable that This is not a huge change. I mean, a lot of this really is paint and safe hit posts. And then in our minds, we're then able to kind of help reduce the temperature in the room and show, hey, this is totally possible. And then to some of the comments I see from Mark and others is like, we we're not going to make this perfect. Like, we're not professional engineers, and we're not saying that this is exactly MUTCD compliant. What we are trying to convey is that this is possible, and that we don't have to like change everything about the world to make it safer. So I appreciate that, John, and all the work you're doing. I thought it'd be really fun here just to type out just the quick things we learned and some of the key learnings here. I think one of them that I heard from the beginning is to kind of start simple. Just start with one street. Another one that I heard is that this can be used at a lot of different times. It could be used early, but it could also be used for in response to specific incidents or proposals from the city or the local jurisdiction for an improvement project. And then we use these renderings with stakeholders. Often it's the elected officials.
What's up, Joe? How are you, man?
Hi, Joe. And we help. It's all good, John. And so then we use this for like the officials, city councils, and then the community, and we can really help people feel like, hey, this is not crazy. What we're suggesting is feasible, and it's something that can make our community a better place. We're running a little short on time, so I wanted to answer some of the questions we saw in the chat. And if other folks want to suggest questions, I'm happy to go through them real quick right now. Let's start. We have two different marks. So the first mark with a K, trying to make visualization to convert a 5-lane road in my neighborhood to a 3-lane with street parking and the center turn lane mostly as a grassy median. That is totally doable. So again, I think a great place to start there would be with street mix, making the cross section and then bringing that into 3D Street. Let's see. Do you have plans to add curb cuts? Same person. That's a great question. We don't have curb cuts built into the product right now, but often what we'll see is folks that use the box primitive to create a driveway that overlaps with the sidewalk so that you can see visually where you're proposing to have through traffic on those side streets. So it's not quite as cool as actually having a curb cut, but again, it's used very commonly. I see it in user scenes to indicate where access would be permitted over that curb. And then if you use AI rendering, it often does a good job of making that into a proper curb cut. But again, what's most useful is just indicating with some sort of solid geometry where that access would be to that street. Next
I would
question.
also add that
Yeah,
I do have a curb cut in that list of that repository.
of those
You just have
objects.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, there is
Yes.
one in there. May or may not fit, but you can stretch it and move it up and down
Yeah.
to make it work. And like Kieran said, like the AI, especially Nano Banana, really good at putting those things in.
Yeah, it can do a good job pacing over those things if it has enough context on kind of what you're trying to create. More questions. Do you have a feature roadmap or feature request page? Yeah, we have a couple options for this. The simplest is if you go to 3dstreet.com and we just go to the bottom, there's a link to our Discord right here in our community section. And there, I'm very open. You can suggest anything you want in any of the channels. And then what I'll do to kind of organize all this stuff, let me open up this URL. Here we go. We use GitHub, and this is all open. It's open source, and we can see what is on the prior list, and then there are groupings of future roadmap items. So it's a little geeky, but you can access this by going to GitHub, going to our 3D Street account, and then looking through our project board. And so things that people suggest on Discord or email then are added here as tickets inside of our system, and we prioritize it. An interesting example here is a term for foot gun. So when you let people do things in an app that kind of causes problems, a very common request is to essentially have objects be able to stick to the ground instead of floating. So that's just one example that users are asking for, and so we turn that into a ticket. And we really do appreciate any and all feedback around how we can fix this and make it all better. So thank you for that. More questions. This one, thank you, John, for all these models. And as a reminder, that is accessible through, where did that link go? This tiny URL. The person's asking, how do they go from these models and transfer that into their scene? There's a couple ways to do it. So one way is that you can take any scene that you can open and you can save as and make that your own. So that's one technique where you take this, you save it, and then you delete the objects that you don't need. Another technique is that these objects are hosted, and you click on the object, you select it, you then click on advanced, and you can see the URL for this model right there. And so you can copy that, and in a new scene, you'll add a new custom layer. So I'll just drop this example here. I'll paste in that model, and boom, I have another copy of that light rail train.
The other thing is, like, if you have the free version, you can, this is the easiest way to do it is what Kieran explained originally, is delete everything else if you want that model in there.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Let's see, other questions. We touched on an idea. I'm going to read this out loud from Mark Skirbo. Advocates don't need to become technical experts in every aspect of traffic engineering. Our role is to create ideas that inspire neighbors and communities to demand safe street designs. I totally agree. And I think that's the okay place for us to be. We are advocates in this role. We do not need to make these things fully compliant. That's not our role. And I like this comment by Paul. As a professional engineer, tools like this are super useful to generate those visuals for the non-engineers out there. And he, as a professional, notices some of the non-compliant elements, but that's okay, right? That's not our role to make this stuff perfect. And the goal here is that we're able to then have that conversation from a world of feasibility. And what I mean by that is that the work that John is doing is feasible. It fits in the real estate, and it's not something that's fantastical, right? And I think that's the part that had been missing in a lot of these conversations when the community comes forward and presents things that are just not even a starting point of feasibility. So I really appreciate that perspective.
So one of my things that I've learned over the years is that the best way to get information from professionals and engineers is to just be wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
it's
you
okay.
get because sometimes it'll be like, I can't, and that's wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the right way? And
Totally.
so I use that reverse psychology all the
Well,
time.
it's great because you've done 90% of it correctly, and there may be that 5%, 10%, and that is the role of a professional engineer to help with that.
Yeah, and I
Other,
think it's a respect to the profession too, right?
yeah, totally. Totally. And then Matej was saying that he discovered 3D Street through StreetMix. They were able to use the Quest, a VR device, to be able to show people this experience firsthand. And then they used that render in a petition to redesign the road and lower the speed limit. Awesome. That's a success story. Thank you for sharing that. Mark Schlossberg asks, have you seen other city staff take this up? He's offering to train some of the local staff at his city. He's in a university role, and he's trying to convince the city staff to use tools like this, but he hasn't had luck so far. My honest answer is that I see uptick across the board from three personas. We have advocates, which is the purpose of this webinar, to talk about that persona, but we do have city staff, and we do have a lot of university students and staff and professionals using this tool. What I observe a lot of the time with city staff is that it takes a long time for folks to adopt new tools. And so there are some pockets of jurisdictions that adopt these much faster, but in general, it does take a while. And where I do find success is doing the work that John is doing now, where we show them what's possible. And we do it in a way that is collaborative. We're showing, here's our ideas. We're not forcing them to accept them. But in doing so, I do find that that's one of the best ways to get them engaged, because they'll see what's possible and they'll ask, well, how did you do that? I didn't know that existed. And so being positive and showing what you can do is one of the ways that we've seen a lot of cities adopt this. And then I also have been doing lots of direct conversations with folks around helping them adopt. And in fact, I'll switch over to what we're working on over the rest of the year, which is actually to go to a bunch of events. So this webinar was kind of the first idea for starting to open the conversation with more advocates, professionals, and folks that work in this space. I'm actually going to be on the East Coast with John. Sorry, I'm fast forwarding through to some of the upcoming events. So this is another goal that we have to expand people's awareness of these tools. So today was our webinar. On March 7th, both John and I will be at the New Jersey Bike and Walk Summit. So I'm excited to have that opportunity to meet folks, advocates and professionals will be at that one. And then we will be at the week after Transforming Transportation Conference in Washington, D.C. That's put on by the World Bank and some other groups. So I'm also really looking forward to the opportunity to work with folks there. We're leading a session on how to use some of our new mobile capture tools to be able to create basic scenes. And Matej says we should come to Europe too. That would be great. Let's talk about it. That would be a lot of fun. So hopefully through this combination of folks like John doing this awesome work, and then by meeting people and showing them what we can do, we can help bring the professionals on board as well to use some of these rapid prototyping tools. Okay, well with that, we are already way longer than I thought we would go. John, thank you so much for sharing all the awesome work you're doing. It's really an inspiration, and I really like seeing the positive comments here that the work you're doing has meaning and resonates with this group.
So much fun. I love this program. So it's great to share it.
Yeah, thanks for your
Thanks,
patience.
everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
I've done far worse.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Have a
All
great
right.
one. Bye.
Bye.